Hey loves, welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today guys, I'll be checking out Blaire White and Ben Shapiro debates. And you guys, I'm excited for this. If you're here to subscribe to this channel, please consider subscribing. Give this video a massive thumbs up, comment, share, and all that good stuff. And without much ado, let's see what this video is all about.
This video is sponsored by me. My official merch store is now online. This is a great way to support the channel and also get an awesome shirt, hoodie, mug, or a pair of socks. Link in the description.
Hey Ben, how are you?
Hey, doing okay. How are you?
Pretty good. So this is sort of something that's been really highly requested on my end, on my channel. I think pretty much since the beginning of me coming on YouTube, people have said, talk to Ben, talk to Ben, talk to Ben. Okay. So glad it's finally happening. And this is sparking from an appearance that you did on the Rubin Report a few days ago. And the pronoun topic came up, the trans topic came up, and then I came up. And then I woke up the next day on Twitter and there was just mayhem, people being offended for me because of, you know, obviously your vocal stance on using biological pronouns. What did you think about sort of like the crazy reaction on Twitter to that?
I mean, it was overblown, obviously. I mean, my feeling on this has been pretty well known for a very long time, which is that pronouns are designed to differentiate between men and women, and that transgender women are not biological women, and that anything that attempts to overcome that argument is obfuscation rather than clarification. Like, you're a transgender woman, and so you're a transgender woman, but to me there is a big difference between a transgender woman and a biological woman, and if we're supposed to use these sort of generic pronouns to refer to men and women, then we ought to be using them at their most root level, which is the biological differences. Now, if you want to construct another set of pronouns and talk about whether we use those, that I'm up for. But if you want to talk about hijacking pronouns that have historically been used to describe male and female in biological sense, and then suggest that I am forced to use those pronouns to apply to people who do not fulfill those biological functions, then I have a bit of a problem. And none of that is said with any disrespect meant. The reason it came up on Rubin's show, on Dave's show, is because we were talking about specifically the issue of addressing people like you in a conversation. And the answer is that, you know, I would address you by your name, typically. I mean, I would try to avoid specifically offending you by using a pronoun that you don't like, but I also am not going to bow to the sort of social convention now that I'm supposed to use a pronoun of people's choosing rather than a pronoun that accurately describes the truth.
Absolutely. I think that you and I definitely agree on a lot of this. I think Dave's argument, because he was sort of pressing you on the pronoun thing, he was sort of making it you should use this because it's about dignity and grace and compassion, which, you know, Dave's a really nice guy. He's a great friend. I'm not trying to make a dig at him, but I think it's not the best argument for this conversation, and neither is the tactic of all the people on Twitter, you know, just getting offended. I think there is a YouTuber by the name of Theron Meyer who just threw out an FU, and to me, the conversation goes nowhere when that happens. For me, I'd rather have a conversation sort of about the logic behind your stance, and sort of my argument would be the functionality and sort of real-world application of using, you know, hardline biological pronouns for people. My argument would be, I did the Michael Knowles show over at you guys' studios a while back, and he was sort of expressed to me that he was sort of feeling conflicted with the person he was sitting and interacting with, and the fact that he, you know, has the same stance as you typically on pronouns. And the thing that came up was, well, if you and I were to go to a business dinner or any kind of dinner, and you were meeting me at a restaurant, and I was there first, and I was in an orange shirt, and you had to tell, you know, the host, I'm here to meet my friend Blaire, and they said okay, and you had to describe me to take me to the table. You wouldn't say the man in the orange shirt, you would say Blaire, you would say her over there. So for me, it's about sort of real world application of it. The thing that I hate the most is being expected in these conversations to sort of suspend my reality of how like social interaction really works outside of the debate. So what do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I think there's some truth to that, meaning that I think that there is a utility to the use of pronouns, but that's not quite the same as suggesting that a transgender woman is a she in the objective sense. So if I were to go to dinner with you and there were to be a waiter there and I were to direct the waiter to you, obviously we would go based off your physical appearance, but the argument for transgender people is that if you looked like me, you could still be transgender woman, right? You wouldn't actually have to go through surgery, you wouldn't have to actually go through hormone treatments, you wouldn't have to go through any of that to be perceived as a woman. And therefore, if it would actually be assuming pronouns for me to be sitting at dinner and you to walk up and say, that dude sitting over there, right? You'd actually be assuming my pronoun if I were a transgender woman. And this is the part where it gets into this really bizarre space that makes no sense to me, meaning that, obviously, in terms of utilitarian effect, you're right. If I were to walk into dinner and try and describe you, you look like a woman. Therefore, to the person there, I wouldn't be trying to explain who you were or your background, because what's the point of that? I want to get from point A to point B in the quickest possible time,
exactly.
from the front door to the table in the quickest possible time. But that's not to suggest the truth of the pronoun that I'm using to describe to the person. Let me give you a different example. If there were a person who were sitting at dinner and that person were wearing a blonde wig, but the person weren't actually blonde, right? I would say the blonde over there. That doesn't mean the person actually has naturally blonde hair. It means that the person is blonde sitting there. So I think that it's important to differentiate these things as opposed to sort of conflating. I think a lot of the confusion with this stuff is from conflation. So it's people saying that, Blaire, you're white. Well, you're correct. You're right. When it comes to the third person description, therefore, I should always address you directly, or when I talk about you, I should address you the same way that I would address a biological woman. I don't think that argument follows at all.
Exactly. I think context matters. I saw an interview with you on, I think it was Joe Rogan, where you were saying that you have absolutely no issue referring to a trans person by perhaps a new legal name if they were to change their name, because it's like you can change your name. So I just had the question, because you can in fact legally change your gender as well. Does that affect anything as far as that goes for you either? It
doesn't, just because gender and sex are objective truths. Names are not objective truths, right? This is going back to Romeo and Juliet. And a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. If I named my daughter something else, she would be the same human being. So that's not quite the same thing when it comes to objective, verifiable facts with regard to sex and or gender. So, Rachel Dolezal could, let's say you could legally change your race. It wouldn't make Rachel Dolezal any more black than Rachel Dolezal is, which is to say she's white. So the legal aspect...
I think...
Sorry, go ahead.
I think for me it kind of goes down to, for instance, if someone were to adopt children, there's no biological basis for calling them that kid's parents, because they're not. Like, they're just literally not. There's no link at all biologically, but there is a social reason to do it and there's a legal reason to do it. So for me, that's sort of where it boils down to me with pronouns. And I agree with you also. You've mentioned that if someone makes no effort to transition at all, it's really unreasonable to expect that someone actually uses pronouns in a way that they prefer, because I think pronouns boil down to, rather than chromosomes, I think secondary sex characteristics, which are still biological, but it really does kind of boil down to what you look like, in my opinion. So
to go back to the adoptive parents argument, I would say that we actually do have different descriptions for adoptive parents than biological parents, right? You'll say in shorthand that they're parents, because they're all different types of parents, but we do say adoptive parents, right? We don't just say, like, if we were to refer to you as a trans woman and that were all we were going to refer to you as, I'm fine with that. I don't care, you're a trans woman, sure. That's not the same as a biological woman, it's a different descriptor. The same thing is true of adoptive parents versus biological parents. And then the question becomes, okay, exactly as the context that you were suggesting matters, in what context are we talking about the parents? Are we talking about a PTA meeting? Okay, this person is the legal guardian and therefore the parent, because parenting has two aspects, right? There's the biological parentage, and then there is the actual role of parenting. And so I would assume that in the dinner conversation, the same thing sort of holds true, meaning there's the biological role of woman, which you're not, and then there is the you look like a woman, which is I'm going to describe you as a woman to the waiter when he comes to direct me to the table.
Right. I think this is the interesting differentiation to make, but because I think a lot of people seem to think that your stance isn't just in the context of perhaps a debate or in the context of perhaps, arguing about these things, that it's like in every social aspect.
No, I don't care about that. I mean, this is exactly what I said to Dave. Like, what I said to Dave is, the problem is that whenever I discuss this topic, it is inevitably in a public setting, right? And once you start discussing the topic, the typical thing that people on the left like to do is to bring somebody who's transgender into the conversation and then make it as though I'm insulting that person if I take the position that I'm taking. And I find that utterly obnoxious, right? In the same way that I find it obnoxious when Jimmy Kimmel trots out his child to talk about healthcare. Like, what does this have to do with anything? Yeah. My argument is either true or it's not true on its own merits, not based on the audience to whom I'm speaking.
Right, absolutely. And I think that from what I've seen, a lot of your interactions with trans people, although I guess there haven't been many, but in sort of like debate form, but the ones that I have, they always end up kind of ugly. You know what I mean? There was I think the person's name was Zoe Tur. Mm-hmm. There was the threat of physical violence, and then so I look at that and I feel like on my end it's like I'm always damage controlling for the trans community, which is so frustrating. I'm sure you saw that on Twitter.
What's hilarious about this, Blaire, is literally the exact same thing that I'm saying to you right now is exactly what I said to Zoe Tur on the air, right? I mean, this is the exact same argument in almost the exact same way. And because you're a reasonable human being, you're not trying to leap through the camera to strangle me. And I've just always found it bewildering that if we are going to substitute, offense based on identity for actual argument, then we're not going to get anywhere with this particular discussion. And you're exactly right. When people start yelling at each other or tweeting out F you, that's not a great way to change my mind. It turns out that's not particularly convincing.
Yeah, and this may seem like another run-of-the-mill talk about pronouns, but I actually think there was kind of a revelation made here. I think there genuinely is a misconception that your stance on pronouns is like in any setting. And I think that was always my confusion was, like again, suspending my knowledge of how real interactions work. I'm like, well, that wouldn't actually work in real life. But it works in terms of like, no, we're talking about trans issues, so we're going to talk hardline biology, that's your choice. I would say that there's some settings in which, for instance, there was a Daily Caller article written about me a few months ago. I did a video wearing a Trump hat in Hollywood, and it was a mess, but I did, they wrote an article about me, and they initially used female pronouns, she and her, for the entire article, and then one of the people working there decided to amend it and change it completely to male. And so it created a lot of confusion among like their readers. Like a lot of the comments were like, why is this saying he? And they were looking at my photos and didn't understand it. So I think sometimes even in public discourse, there's scenarios in which it's like, okay, that doesn't actually work. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, that's why, I'm the editor of a pretty major site, and my basic rule is that when we're discussing people who are trans, we immediately say in the first paragraph, trans woman, and then refer to them by their biological pronoun, because biology is the nature of the pronoun. So we try to be clear from the outset. But, again, when you're having public discussions, I think that it's imperative that we actually use terms that refer to something. If you want to talk about gender as distinct from sex, and then talk about you're a very feminine biological man, and you've had the surgeries to prove it, then I think that we can talk about what is the appropriate pronoun to use. My problem is there is an attempt, I think, by the trans community to basically sever off gender from sex and say that gender is not dependent on sex in any way. They are not connected in any way. And then we're going to use the pronoun that has historically been used by the linkage of gender and sex, and we're going to now reinfuse our perception of gender into biological sex, and we're going to say that trans women are women in the same way that biological women are women, and that just it makes no logical sense. And not only that, it obfuscates the issue. It doesn't actually get anywhere. Like I feel like a lot of the pronoun discussion is just a way to try and guilt people into taking particular stances on particular issues. Like, here's the thing, Blaire, I'm completely libertarian on what you do. I don't care if you get surgery or hormone treatments. Do what floats your boat. I'm like, whatever. I mean, I hope that whatever makes you happier and healthier is what makes you happier and healthier. I may have my own perspective on if it were my kid, what I would allow my kid to do, but that's not the same thing as me saying to you, who are an adult, you ought to do what I want you to do. But there's this idea that if we can just batter people with the pronoun discussion and make them seem as though they're uncaring and unfeeling and evil and nasty, then we'll somehow win the day. And I object to that generally because, unlike even Michael Knowles, I do not have a surfeit of feeling. I'm not particularly keen on feelings as a motivator in politics.
Yeah, you make that clear. Yeah, I think that's the point about guilt is a major point. I think that's what all these conversations are. I think that the reaction on Twitter was more so about guilting you. And I think, and like I said, Dave is a really dear friend, so no dig. But I think even to a certain extent, but I think like even to a certain extent, his argument was more about like, well, can't you just be nice? And it's like, okay, there's room to be nice. Okay, there's room for everyone to be nice, but there's also like, that's not the best argument for this. Yeah. And I think that.
And by the way, there are ways for me to be nice within my own purview. Meaning that, as I said before, if you and I were talking, I would just refer to you as Blaire all the time, right? In order to to avoid this controversy, because it would be more fun to have dinner with you where we were just discussing topics as opposed to fighting about pronouns.
Exactly, and when you begin setting up parameters for conversations of, well, this is what I think is kind or compassion, so you have to, fulfill that, then it's like people can start coming up with all sort of unreasonable things, which is what people do. So I think the fact that we had a conversation about it makes a whole lot more sense than people screaming about it, and I think that what I learned is that context matters with you, and that's something that even as someone who follows your work, I didn't really see that. For me, like I said, my idea of what your stance was like every single situation. So talking matters. I think that's like the takeaway here.
Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity. So I'm glad that you invited me on, and I'm glad that the Rubin Report prompted that, and I'm glad that Dave had the conversation just so we could have this one. So it's great to talk to you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a nice day.
You too.
Wow, you guys, that was such an interesting one from Ben Shapiro and Blaire White. I love the fact that both of them were on the same page. I really enjoyed how mature this interview was, or will I say this debate was, and I learned a lot from both of them. Ben Shapiro really spoke from a very knowledgeable place, and I enjoyed every minute that this lasted. If you guys totally enjoyed watching, give this video a massive thumbs up, comment, share, and all that good stuff. And this is me officially signing out. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.